Welcome everybody, and hello Maddy. This week I'm with Maddy Harland from Permaculture magazine and many other areas as well, which hopefully we will explore, that you are not just Permaculture magazine, but really that's where we know Maddy mainly from. And so welcome to the Solutions podcast and video log.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Nicola.
Yay. So something I'd love us to talk about is that permaculture isn't just growing vegetables.
Oh, thank you. Luby McNamara is going to be very happy that you said that.
Yeah. So I think quite often when you say the word permaculture to people, they just instantly think, oh, that's organic growing vegetables. And that's the end of that.
Well, yeah, herb spirals, mulching, and maybe some perennials.
That's right. So how can we move past this idea? What do we need to do?
If we go back to basics, the absolute building blocks of permaculture are three ethics, which are not, exclusive to permaculture. They are utterly universal, really. They're about caring for the earth, caring for people, and sharing, fair shares, rather than hoarding and being greedy. And fair shares can be about justice, restorative justice. It's not just about, sharing resources, although obviously sharing resources is really important on a finite planet. Fair shares also has a dimension about limits to growth and conserving resources and recognizing that, we're possibly using 3 or 4 planets worth of resources up as in our sort of Western industrial societies, and that we absolutely have to change. That it's not even about going back to net zero. It's almost beyond that. We've got to systemically change how we live. So when you look at those 3 dimensions, how we design our gardens and farms, of course, are incredibly important, because we're looking at making the best of our land, taking care of it. But as you say, it's not just about farming and gardening. It's about the whole land care movement and how we create regenerative farms, but also how we create species diversity and preserve species and bring endangered species back into good heart. So it's about, permaculture can be as much about rewilding land and creating habitats as it is about food. It's not all about people, but it's really
Really? It's not all about people?
No,
No,
because we've got to share.
no.
We've got to share with all our relations, the 2-legged relations, the ones that fly, then creep and crawl. It's not all about us. We're not actually narcissistic permaculturists. And then there's this other dimension, which is community. So the recognition is, when we design our projects, and permaculture is a design system fundamentally, with principles and practice, and great examples all over the world that are very much based on local conditions and local culture. But when we design projects, we have to design for the well-being of the more than human world, but we also have to design for the well-being of people, because often what really messes up projects is not how we apply good circular ecological thinking. It's how we get on with other people and how we design in harmonious relationships and conflict resolution, and all this kind of slightly messy, gooey dimension of human relationships, which is often more challenging than designing a regenerative land-based project.
So when we look at that, the pie with these 3 slices of the earth, the people, and the fair bit.
Yeah.
So the people care side of it, which often, kind of keeping on bringing that separation of there's people and there's the earth, like we're separate things. And like the Vesica Pisces, we know that there's a real overlap there as well between the kind of the earth care bit, the people care. We are nature, we are just another species, not as important as the earthworm, but we are just another species on this planet. But the people side of it is also feels for me what's so needed are more hands, because there's a lot of people talking, but getting it out of the mind into the physicality of actually the people caring for the earth, and whether that caring for the earth means growing some vegetables or doing some rewilding or helping with conservation projects. But that fundamental need for people's hands to be the guardians and the caretakers to really assist the earth at this time.
Absolutely, and so critical at this time when we do have, enormous species lost, and ecosystem collapse all over the world. And we can make a difference, and maybe it's only a tiny difference, but it's always amplified when a few people start to change things. It creates a critical mass, as you well know, and so it's sort of fundamental to look at that trajectory of solutions and not feel like, oh well, it doesn't matter, so I won't bother. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. I mean, I always remember Joanna Macy, the wonderful Buddhist scholar and originator of the works that reconnects, talking about that Buddhist perspective of non-attachment. So non-attachment to the outcomes of our actions. So we do our stuff, we get engaged, we get our hands dirty. As you say, we grow vegetables, or we do conservation, or whatever it is that we do. Some people are brilliant organizers, and that's their skill. They're not mulchers. We play to our skills, whatever it is, and then we let go and think, I'm not going to think, oh, I'll spend 20 years publishing wonderful permaculture books and that's going to change the world. Because if I felt like that, in year 32, and looking at the world as it is now, I'd be extremely despondent, and I could possibly give up. But that's not actually, that's not the deal. The deal is to do the stuff, and then don't look to the results. Just do it because it's the right way to be, right way to live, and also it brings joy.
How many publications have you actually published now, the magazine and books at Permanent Publications?
Do I don't actually know. I think, well, I know that we're working on 122 issue Permaculture magazine, issue 122. I know that we're gathering for that. And I think there's sort of well over 120 odd books that have gone to press over the last 32 years. But I did count a few years ago, and I knew exactly, and then I need to sit down and count again.
I mean, over 100, Maddy. That's a pretty...
Oh no, well, it's 120.
That's amazing. and those seeds, those books, which have really helped people to find some way, find a path which they hadn't seen before. And a lot of what we're doing is we are creating paths that weren't there before.
Absolutely. Well, we have to. We have to change. We talk about the other world that's still just possible, but the pathways to it have to be places that we've never actually been before, because the whole of our planet and our societies are in spaces that we've never experienced before. You know, we've got, yesterday was the hottest day in Britain of the year, but the whole climate this year is unprecedented. We've never had this kind of extraordinary extremes of heat and rain and cold, and it's had a devastating effect on the bird population, for example. You know,
And
because
say butterflies as well. There's hardly any people are talking about
yeah,
them. What's happened to the butterfly bush, the buddleia,
yeah,
which is usually covered in butterflies?
too,
Where are they this year?
too
Because it
cold.
was so wet.
Yeah,
They
wet
just
and cold.
didn't. Yeah. And I've just finished a book called End of Eden,
Mm,
and it's looking at distinct species and the impacts directly on them of climate breakdown. And
yeah.
one of the examples, which I've always, since a child, I've always loved dolphins.
Mm,
And there was a shocking story in there of this dolphin that was very territorial to its bay. The rest of the pod went back out to the ocean, but this one stayed in this bay. It was off of the coast of the US. And it had been so rainy that the rivers were just dumping vast amounts of fresh water into the ocean, which meant that the salinity, the levels of the ocean was so diluted that the dolphin started getting covered in skin lesions. And the scientist couldn't understand what was happening. Why was this dolphin covered in these awful skin lesions? And they discovered that their kidneys only operate in saline conditions. They're not able, their bodies are not able to function. And this hadn't happened before, this vast amount of water washing into the ocean. But thankfully, once the water did dissipate, then the salinity levels rose up and the dolphin, the skin lesions healed and it got better. But the others in the pod had obviously realized that something wasn't up, and they'd all left and they'd swum out to the ocean. But this one that wouldn't leave just stayed in the bay and suffered. And so these impacts that we're seeing on species that we've never seen before. And I think that, I mean, they're talking about this book End of Eden as like the new silent spring, really looking at specific impacts of species and how they're millions of years old and they're just not able to adapt.
yeah,
Whereas humans, we're the youngest of species and we are able to adapt. And I think that's something that we've got to really remember, that the other species are just not able to adapt to these conditions fast enough.
yeah.
But talking about species adapting, I was very excited to hear about your pied flycatchers.
I'm so glad you're going to mention my best friends.
So tell us a bit about their journey. Who are they?
Okay. So I live in North Devon in a 12-acre wood, which is I'm really lucky because it is actually a county wildlife site because it's so species rich. It's a little remnant of deciduous woodland in a landscape of conifers and arable farming, and yeah, there's also sheep pasture as well here, but this is a little remnant. And every year from West Africa, the small and very beautiful pied flycatcher flies north to the western edges of Britain, and they come here to breed and specifically to eat the caterpillars that predate on oak leaves, because they're very high protein. So that's why they come here, because they want to take that protein source. And these are little birds. They're sort of the size of a robin, you know, they're not. So it's an extraordinary journey for them to make, like a bit like house martins, you know, amazing that they do this. And when I first arrived in the wood about 2.5 years ago now, we had, the last people had about 60 nest boxes, and I started cleaning them out, and I was cleaning them out with a friend of mine who's much more so I can't even say the word, or ornithologically wise than me, and he recognized one of the nests, and I knew that there was a chance that there were flycatchers in the wood. I knew we had spotted, but I didn't know whether the pied flycatchers were breeding here. I knew that they were around. And he recognised the formation of this very specific nest because they use totally different materials to blue tits and great tits, and it's quite recognisable. So this was deeply exciting because they are quite rare. And so we agreed to put up more boxes in configuration. So birds are territorial. So if you've got a small garden, for example, if you put up 2 bird boxes, one with a small diameter hole, 28 millimeters, and one with a 32, you'll most likely get a blue tit and a great tit, but you won't get 2 blue tits if they're in proximity because they like the privacy, basically, species wise. So if you put up 3 bird boxes in a fairly close zone, you will possibly get blue tit first, then a great tit, and then possibly a few weeks later, because they've got to fly in, whereas the tits are overwinter here, you'll get a pied flycatcher if you're really lucky. So I set about last winter really optimizing the nest boxes, making sure they were in the right habitat, right height, and then adding the critical third one to the triangle. And we went from 1 breeding pair the year before to 5 this year.
Wow.
And that was, you know, and this is small, but then a really skilled data collector called Christy, who's a volunteer for the British Trust for Ornithology, started to record how many breeding pairs, how many eggs in the clutch, how many fledgling nestlings were there, etc., etc. So on a weekly basis, just to collect the data to really understand how they're doing, and also critically how they're doing this year. And sadly, it was the biggest loss of nestlings that he'd ever experienced, and he's been collecting data for 40 years. So it was so cold that the birds, that either there weren't enough caterpillars or it rained and they couldn't hunt for them and feed the babies enough, or the babies got cold. So nestlings en masse, not just pied flycatchers but tits as well, perished in the nest. But I have to say, because I you know, because of the work we did, expanded the breeding pairs from 1 to 5, we did get successfully fledged birds, and I watched them in the wood before, you know, they flew off. So, you know, it's talking about, these are tiny things, but it really matters. And we might think, oh, you know, blue tits are 10 a penny, you know, they're so common, or whatever, wherever you are in the world, your most generic and common bird is really common. But in this period of climate chaos, it really matters offering them safe and warm and protected nesting spaces, because every fledgling matters when you've got species loss like that because of the weather. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's my, you know, very exotic and very beautiful, these lovely little black and white birds. They're very charismatic, you know, they have a lovely mating call to call for mates, and they're wonderful parents. They both feed their babies, and you can watch them from a distance coming in and bringing food into the nest. It's brilliant. But equally well, doing that with blue tits is charming and wonderful. And of course, there's all over the UK, we've got Swift projects as well, where people are putting up Swift boxes on churches and public buildings and other places to, again, create an opportunity for another migrant to come and nest with us. So yeah, I just would urge everyone who's got even a small yard, just get into it, because it'll bring you joy, but you are making a difference to at least one species out there that's struggling.
And as we know, we need more real estate, and so do the birds.
Absolutely. There's a lot of homeless birds because, you
Yeah.
know, usually birds nest in the crevice of trees and, you know, woodland and find safe spots. But we've taken away so much of our woodland and our woodland edges. You know, birds like the edge between fields and woodland. So it's really important to give them somewhere safe to and warm.
Mm. And
Really.
going from the local to the global again, this coming back to the book that I was mentioning, The End of Eden, and another example they gave was of the hornbill in Africa.
Yeah.
And the hornbill, actually, the female seals the hole up with her own excrement and just leaves a tiny hole enough for the male to feed her and the chicks. But what they've discovered recently is that the way that they cool down if it's really hot is to pant. And so there's been a lot of hornbills sitting in the shade panting, which means they are not having time to get out there and find food to take back to the female and the chicks, which are trapped inside the nest, which is again like just having devastating effects on them. So we keep seeing it over and over again. You know, so many species really need our help. It's hot weather, so, you know, putting out just a simple bowl of water, you know, is like creating an oasis. We don't need to have a fancy bird bath, literally just a plate of water. And for the bees, they say they really need shallow plates of water,
Yes.
so
Yeah,
that
with the
they
stones in them.
exactly. So these are the kinds of things that we can do, and we can really make a difference. So I know you're also a bee lover, Maddy.
I am a lover of bees. I mean, I do keep honeybees, or actually they keep me really. My honeybees are not, I don't buy in uh, reared queens. My bees are all feral bees that I've caught. Well, the swarms have come to me. You can't go around really catching swarms. I mean, bees really are, they coexist with us. So I put out a welcome box and they come and then I put them into a hive. But I'm trying, my most of my beekeeping is quite hands off and just allowing the bees to do what they do. So this year I haven't taken any honey at all from my bees because I feel like they're going to need it this winter, and they haven't had the opportunity to um, make a huge amount of honey. And I don't want to feed my bees sugar water if I can, because it's a bit like feeding your children McDonald's and not fresh vegetables. It's just not good for them. So I'm trying to have bees, keep bees here, but also keep it in balance. So I'm not farming them on a massive scale, and I'm leaving enough bee forage for all the wild species as well, because honeybees are incredibly good at taking the forage in on land. And we need to make sure that we don't overpopulate and that we look after the bumblebees and the solitary bees as well. They're just as important. So
When
this whole thing about saving the bees, it's not all about honeybees. It's about
exactly.
the
And I think
bee.
a lot of us don't get that. I didn't to start with. When some people said that they wanted to bring a couple of beehives where I live, I was like, oh yes, yes, all I was all very excited, and we had these couple of hives put up, and then the conservation group came by and they went, oh, you've got beehives, and I was like, yeah, and I was all really excited. I couldn't understand why, his reaction. And he said, well, are you not planning to get any more, are you? And I
Yeah.
said, one or two hives seems fine. Why? And then they explained, well, the trouble is there's competition by all the different kinds of bees. And there's only a certain amount of food. And if you have vast numbers of hives, then all of the other native bees, are competing for that same amount of food. And which kind of brings us on to the one of the bees' lovely favorite McDonald's food, Himalayan balsam.
Yes.
Which is quite debatable because a lot of beekeepers love Himalayan balsam because the bees just they love it, and I really do see that like McDonald's as well for them. It's not it's a very, very rich nectar source, but there's no diversity in their diet. They'll just have that. And so what happens then to all of our native flowers? They're just not getting pollinated because there's all this lovely bright pink Himalayan balsam. And we've been on a bit of an eradication program here with having different conservation groups coming. And it's taken 5 years to actually kind of get it out of this area. But we are losing a battle with it. It's creeping along the riverbanks. There are so many landowners that either aren't aware of how detrimental it is. The riverbanks, because they have so much Himalayan balsam now on them, which have no roots hardly at all. That's the good thing. At least you can pull it out easy. So the riverbanks are collapsing because there's just nothing on the banks of the rivers. So as fast as, little tiny groups of conservationists are trying to pull this out as an invasive species to give room to the native species. And I've really clearly seen in a bit of a woodland where I've been working, a wet woodland, that when we started, we would literally hit a pink wall, 8 foot tall and just dense. And there was nothing else living. And over the years, we've pushed it back and we've pushed it back. And the diversity that has come back where we have managed to get rid of Himalayan balsam. But unless there are those hands coming forward to say, look, it's about diversity. It's about biodiversity. When something comes in and people say, oh, you can't be talking about invasive species. That it's like talking like anti-immigrant. It's like, whoa, hang on, what's this story? And so there's a real pushback by some people to say that, many things, the apple tree is not native to this land, but it's also not invasive. And I think it's really important that we look at how a plant develops and what it does and how it impacts the local environment. And I have definitely seen the impact of Himalayan balsam. So the other, it's just about at a point now where it's going over and it's too late to pull it out. They've gone into seeds, and Himalayan balsam has got this incredible mechanism that I think one plant, I think it's 7,000 seeds. But the way that it opens with these springs, and you just touch it and it springs everywhere. But remember, it's edible. So if you come across a Himalayan balsam and it's just fat and about to pop, gently put your hand around it, let it pop into your hand, and then eat it. So I think that's one of the best ways to deal with edibles. And I have heard that the whole plant is edible.
Oh, really?
So yes, so that's kind of like the best thing to do with it, maybe to eat it.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. And it's so clever because it likes riverbanks because of course it springs out and then it goes downstream, and that's how it colonizes. It's a clever plant.
So it's an interesting time. We've got, this kind of almost this battle with invasive species coming in and taking over some areas, and wanting to reintroduce species that were once here. Beavers and wild pigs and wolves and these creatures that once freely roamed this land. But our generations don't have a collective memory, which is why the idea of bringing back wolves to so many people is so scary. Whereas if you lived in Romania or Montenegro or Eastern Europe, wolves are still there and people learn to live with them.
And actually domesticated dogs are more likely to savage us than a wolf. Statistically, some of our breeds of dogs are far more dangerous than wolves, because wolves don't, wolves generally are quite shy creatures and they keep away from humans. They're not given to you know, aggression.
And I think that the worry also, the big worry is obviously farmers just saying, well, you know, wolves are going to come in, they're going to take all of our livestock,
Yeah.
and that's the pushback. And the same with landowners not wanting beavers, the idea of they're just going to come and they're going to create havoc and they're going to flood out the land. And
Yeah.
when luckily I live very close by to Knepp, and I saw there, which was very lucky to see inside the beaver enclosure, examples of if you don't want a beaver to chew down a tree, you can either wrap it in wire or you can paint it with
Absolutely.
sand.
You just put chicken wire around it. I have a friend who re-wilds beavers about 20 minutes from where I live in North Devon, and she has a licensed beaver enclosure and breeding beavers now. And we actually went the other day, we went and sat at dusk and went beaver watching, which was very exciting because, you know, they come out at that time, but you have to be quiet as a mouse, and then they'll come out because they are shy. But the fascinating thing about beavers is we have this great problem with drought and floods in our country, and it's only going to get worse. And what beavers, Exeter University have shown that beavers moderate the flow of water through the landscape. So in droughts, the flow through a beaver landscape will be the same as in the flood. So they hold the water back in flood, but they hold the water in the landscape in droughts. So what comes out is always the same, despite the inputs being either, you know, flood or a lack of water. They're extraordinary ecosystem engineers, and we need them. You know, we need them. So we just need to think so differently about our landscapes, and all these culverts and drains and you know, rivers running straight through the landscape to try and empty them into the sea. It's not how nature does it. Nature is far more subtle and has the edge effect, and you know, there's no straight line. So we need to replicate those natural solutions, as you know so well.
Rewiggle the rivers.
Absolutely, reworld the rivers and the streams, and flood the floodplains, and just create the habitats once again. And we will be healthy and better off with that kind of world,
It,
and happier.
it's been very exciting doing my own bit of rewiggling here
Yeah.
where I am and learning from the beavers.
Yes.
With one of the conservation groups, we've built 15 leaky dams.
Mm.
And so as I've watched this area change by all of these leaky dams, and I know I'm sure the beavers would like look at them and not think much of our leaky dams, but we're trying our best. You know, we are making a difference. We're showing that we can learn from the beavers, and even if you don't have a beaver, you can help slow that water.
You can be a beaver.
You can be a beaver. We can aspire to being beavers. And so it's been really exciting seeing the dams, and there's different kinds of dams, and some of them literally have just created those curves. And so, yeah, really, really been fascinating. And we need to encourage, if you live anywhere where you've got streams running through your land and you're able in a position to be able to do leaky dams, we're not talking about a dam which totally stops the flow, but enabling water to flow. Not only does it stop the flooding, but you can see the difference in the water quality as it goes through all these different dams.
Exactly.
Just incredible, all the, you know, particulates that is picked up, and also
the sediment.
Yeah.
So that then the fish can spawn more easily because they're not trying to spawn in cloudy water. So, you know, creating, once again, having gravel beds and rivers and streams and habitat for fish to spawn again. And then you get the kingfishers.
Yeah.
And you know, the whole thing just kicks off and is yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful trajectory, that wilder world.
So I think that is a good place to end this, that we've looked at, you know, the impacts and, you know, the doom and gloom of species loss that is absolutely happening right now. And, you know, how other ways that each one of us can do something. So that's really what, you know, we encourage you to do is, you know, is that using your head, using your hands and your heart, and taking action in whatever way that you can. So thank you so much, Maddy, for joining us. And I will put the link at the end to Permaculture Magazine and Permanent
Thank you.
Publications. So do check out some of the books in the series. And thank you.
And let me just say to your lovely listeners, if you do subscribe to Permaculture Magazine, you get access to all of those 121 issues, all searchable by author and subject. So it's a kind of whole library of 32 years of work that we just make available free of charge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.